Hi everyone, I'm really excited to host Cameron Robertson from Kong. I had the pleasure to meet Cameron at ETH Denver and also got a chip from Cameron which connects to your wallet and you can mint an NFT or a POAP with it. So Kong has been doing amazing work in this space, so I thought it would be great if we can host Cameron to understand his journey in about physical, digital, and blockchain bridge. Thanks, Cameron, for being on the show.
Definitely. Thanks for hosting me.
Yeah. So I would like to trace back to your journey. I know you mentioned you're part of YC and you were working on a startup. How was that transition, and what were you doing in that startup which led to this?
Yeah. So that goes way back. We were in Y Combinator a long time ago, one of the early batches. I think it was summer 2009. And so the company that we started back then, we were focusing on a few different things, and we actually honed in on smartphone controlled door locks. So at that time, 2010, 2011, it was pretty new. And one of the big pieces of dealing with smartphone controlled door locks, of course, is not only you have physical key management, but digital key management. So that actually pulled us pretty far into the crypto hardware space at that time. But that's actually cryptography, not relating to blockchain. And so we started to build up a lot of experience in manufacturing and managing keys and key handoff. And that company, it was incredible learning experience. We went to China for manufacturing, Taiwan, dealt with all these different systems, and we at the end of it decided to sell the company in 2018 because by that point in time we had been sort of like completely enamored and red pilled on the idea of crypto. And the reason for that is actually, so I'd been playing with Bitcoin for a long time, and somewhere around 2016 we actually had a customer at Lockatron reach out to us, and they said, "Oh, your door locks have the best API. We're going to build Airbnb on the blockchain on Ethereum." And we're like,
Oh,
"What are you talking about?" It was called Slockit. And so it's interesting. Those guys were originally involved with the DAO, which was eventually hacked. But Slockit was this idea of you could pay and immediately get access to stuff. So that when they reached out to us, we said, "What are you talking about? This is crazy. There's interesting stuff happening here." And so we realized, okay, the Ethereum is radically going to change things. And it pulled us back into, we should take a look at this. And we realized that there weren't many people working on hardware experiences tailored specifically for crypto. And in that case, I mean cryptocurrency and blockchain. Other than, say, ledgers and Trezors, nobody was experimenting with how could you put crypto out in the real world. And that was really kind of our starting point of jumping into the predecessor to Kong.
I see. And I'm curious, one more aspect about Slockit. So you mentioned it's Airbnb for blockchain. So were they using your API and smart lock in all their houses? And if you want to unlock, you need to pay gas, or like how was the procedure?
Yeah, so they were using our locks really just for testing purposes. They never scaled up with them, but the idea was we would our locks were still on a normal centralized server, so they weren't decentralized. The architecture back then, it wasn't almost really possible to do it yet, but they were handling all the transaction side. So the idea was you would create your booking and then pay for your booking, and that would all be on chain. And then at the moment that you're at the door, there would be some sort of key procedure which then would allow you through our API to unlock the door. And I don't know if they ever really deployed the sort of Airbnb for spaces concept. I think they did do some deployments around charging electric cars. I think they're experimenting. Slockit's broader mission was sort of unlocking anything in the physical world via blockchain. So it was a very early example of that, but really interesting concept.
I see. And if you were to architect that solution right now, how would you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, the incredible thing now is the tooling has just gotten so much better. So, you know, from everything to data availability and storage and I think that the funny thing is actually back then in 2016, as Ethereum was just getting going, transaction costs were actually quite low, so you could do things on Ethereum directly. But now, obviously, that's not possible. But with all the L2s and rollups, the feasibility of actually carrying out transactions like that, I think, are interesting and possible. But really, from a hardware standpoint, the entirety of kind of the not only the smart lock world, but the access control world is designed with a centralized system in mind. So the idea is you have a centralized server which manages symmetric keys with locks. And so the idea of doing asymmetric key cryptography and just letting a network control the door locks is just completely different. Obviously, it's possible. That's a lot of what we're doing now, but you could totally re-architect it that way. And I think the other challenge is speed. So one of the things with crypto that we obviously we're waiting for transaction times. Sometimes for like IPFS resources, we're waiting because they're not like cached super well. The thing with the door locks that was interesting that we learned was when people remotely access a door, they want it to unlock immediately, like very, very quickly. We're talking like sub 2 seconds, and the mechanical operation is within that. So latency is a huge challenge. And I think that one would have to think through a scheme where maybe the system really is about key distribution via blockchain, and then local access, so you can still have the immediacy because your smartphone has a cached shared key which gives you access for some period of time. But I think that the whole means of the centralized system, it was all about speed and efficiency. And in the case of blockchain, it's complete control. So one of the problems we always had was people would always say, yeah, but if you really wanted to, couldn't you unlock everyone's doors? And it's not as though we had some giant unlock everyone's doors button in the panel, but we could never guarantee that someone couldn't write code in our system that would put in some malicious thing, et cetera, et cetera. Versus with asymmetric crypto, you can build in guarantees like that, where truly the system has no capability of accessing your lock, but instead it only allows for the facilitation of you as the owner sending a key to me as the guest.
I see. And like it's like also like choices you need to make: speed versus security and timing, like, and the user experience.
Right.
So
Right. And I think now working on sort of distributed and decentralized systems for a few years now, it's just completely a different worldview of how you would approach the problem. Again, where, it's not about how do I send this message through the servers, through the chain really quickly. It's how do I distribute control to the end users at the right time so that they can immediately carry out that action. And I think that's been the hardest thing of adapting into Web3 is, it's just a very different mental model.
yeah, and also you're playing in the physical digital bridge where like accessibility is also one big challenge, where people are not only on desktop, they're on phones or other edge devices. So how do you provide that solution?
Yeah, exactly. So with our the product that we're working on now, with the first Concash note, this was actually a problem because the capabilities of what we're using on the NFC side were only available to the native APIs, which meant you had to download an app in order to interact with it. And I think that wasn't a terrible requirement, but obviously, if you're on a poor connection and it's your first interaction with the piece of hardware, that's a huge pain. And so one of the things that we've engineered with the new product is you don't need to download an app. You can do everything via the browser. And so I think that those kinds of considerations are really key because, again, if you're out at a conference or out in the field or just someone encountering this object for the first time, and it's like, oh, you need to get this 30 megabyte app, you might not have a connection that supports that. And being, empathetic to that is really helps the user experience of just fast onboarding.
I see. I would like to do a bit of deep dive into your crypto cash, Concash. So is it like each cache node is pegged to each token in on the blockchain. It's ERC20 pegged, and let's say if I lose the cache, is it still redeemable? Like, can you walk us down through like how that works?
Yeah, and I'll first give a little bit of background on Concash. So here's a Concash note. When we first started it, sort of exploring, after Dorlocks, what we wanted to do in crypto, we had a couple of ideas, and we did this really deep dive on secure chips in 2018, 2019, because we had used a number of secure chips with our lock product. We had a lot of experience with them, but we realized that at the core of crypto is this notion of, especially non-custodial crypto or self-custodial, generating a asymmetric key pair. And that's just very confusing for people who've never done it before. Telling my dad, who knows what Bitcoin and Ethereum are, that he has to generate this random string of numbers and then keep it very safe is a very confusing concept. And so that's where we zoomed in and we said, okay, if we can focus on the chips that do this, we can make physical experiences around that key so that it's much easier for a person who is not savvy on these things, on how to use that key. The problem was you have all sorts of security guarantees from different kinds of chips, and it's not apparent, even based on like industry standards, exactly how those chips handle different cryptographic key material. And so that's where with Concash, we wanted to demo it. And we said, okay, the idea behind Concash is we take one of these super secure chips and we embed it into a physical form that anybody understands what this is. Because everybody from like age 3 or 4 have seen a cash note, and learns how to spend it pretty quickly thereafter. And so the idea is it operates just like cash. So it has the secure private key is generated by a chip on the note. It never leaves the chip. By design, it only allows you to create signatures that give you access to an escrow contract. And that escrow contract, in the case of this note, opens up in October of 2022. So after which point of time, the note itself it's expired. If no one claims the token, it still lives on the note, but it means that after that date, anyone can come and claim the token. And yeah, the whole goal of Kong is, let's make it feel and look like real cash. But to your point, if someone loses the note, it's just like cash. The value is gone. If I hand you the note when I spend it, now it's a bearer instrument and you get to hold it, and it's your Kong cash effectively. The on-chain part is kind of interesting too, because so if we were to do this for another ERC token today, you would just load the ERC token into the escrow contract. But in the case of Concash, because we controlled the token, we actually created it so the later notes that we produced mint out of the Kong ERC20 Genesis block. So this node is actually not backed by the token. It's backed by a guarantee that you can mint the token at the date of October 2022. So that token doesn't actually exist yet. And it's kind of an interesting exploration of like, what does it mean to mint a token or mine it? So yeah, we explored a lot of those concepts with Concash notes.
Got it. And I'm trying to understand. Let's say I have a couple of Concash nodes. So one cost you have is manufacturing node, manufacturing the chip, and once I have a couple of nodes, I go to escrow, claim it, and I get value. And am I connecting to MetaMask and sending all the value back to tokens in my chain or like on chain?
Right, exactly. So basically, at that date, you can generate a signature, and we're pretty careful about what we have you generate in the signature. We're having you sign basically a recent block hash from Ethereum and your address, so we know A, that it's been recently signed, it can't be an old signature, and B, that you're the one who's claiming it, so nobody else can come in and sort of front run your transaction and then claim it themselves. And so those two pieces of information together, when you send that signature to the smart contract, the contract will mint the Kong token directly to your address. So from there, it's a typical ERC20. You can spend it, you can trade it. Nothing special about it from there.
I see. And what was the tokenomics when you were developing this product? Like, how would it inflate?
Yeah, so with Concash, we didn't want to do anything else with the token except for focus on it as its use in showing off the cash. So, for instance, there are questions of like, okay, why didn't we make an Ethereum note as our first instance of the currency? And that actually comes down to a lot of the aesthetic side and the idea of money. So if you think about any cash out there, it speaks to the country and the society that have issued it. So the U.S. dollar bill has American presidents on it. The euro notes have these kind of like generic-looking European bridges on them. Most countries use political figures, but it speaks to its country. And so we said, okay, for us to design an authentic Ethereum note, like we would be imparting some of our views on that. But we said if we were to design something completely different with its own cultural history and background, effectively, we had like total free reign to do that. And so Kong, the idea behind Kong, is that we wanted to design a deep reference to thinking of what does future money look like, what is a future society in sort of an optimistic crypto way look like. And so if you look at the Concash notes, we used, Greek and Roman gods because they're classical looking, but we also used a combination of English and Chinese because we wanted to say, okay, well, if you have this potentially global currency or multi-society currency, having different languages on there is kind of interesting. And so on the back, you actually have the planet reflecting the god on the front. So it's this, in this case, the one Kong node is Mercury, so this is sort of Mercury with a cutaway. And there's all these different references. So there's a see-through portion that's kind of an Easter egg. And so we wanted to build up this culture. So that's the reason we did our own token. And the tokenomics are actually pretty straightforward. So the Kong notes can mint onto the notes, or sorry, the Kong notes have the capability to mint out of the Genesis block. Then we gave ourselves, I think it's like 4 years of capability to print more Kong notes, but due to the chip shortage, we never did. So I think that probably, so we started them in 2019. Next year, that capability will run out. So there's the Kong notes in existence and the ability to print a few more. And then lastly, there's this thing which we created called a lock drop, which in 2019 was kind of a novel concept. Edgeware did it. They were pioneering the idea of a lock drop. It's effectively like staking. And that is actually permanently built into the ERC20 contract, where every month a lock drop can be launched and it will add 1/12 of 1% of token to the total amount of Kong token. And we just said, well, we just want to have an interesting mechanism of like growing the total Kong token. Anybody can compete for it in the lock drop contract. They just lock up Ethereum for anywhere from a month to a year. And then depending on who they're competing with and this total sum of Ethereum, they'll get a stake out. Kong token doesn't have any value. We didn't intend to create a market or try to sell it. Again, it was just let's experiment with building this token and putting it out there.
Got it. It's like I haven't seen that kind of project before. So like you guys were very experimental at the time. I'm curious, like what are some alternative ways to architect like physical crypto? So one is you have chip. I in top of my mind, I could think you can also print a QR code which could link to it. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So we did a lot of research on previous iterations of this because there had been previous, especially Bitcoin coins and notes that had been made, and usually the simplest thing you can do is print a private key on a piece of paper. And the funny thing is, talking to sort of like Ethereum and Bitcoin OGs, there are some people who had like these really sad pieces of paper in their wallet with QR codes that they couldn't read anymore, where someone had gifted them a small amount of crypto, and that was effectively the private key, but it had faded because the receipt paper was
Uh,
no longer working. So I think there was actually a period of time where people just handed out QR codes to give away crypto, and that was the easiest way to do it. The more sophisticated notes, Bitcoin Swiss did this, and this Casacious Bitcoin coin did this, where you would basically hide the private key somewhere. So in the case of Casacious coin, it would be hidden behind, I believe, a label that you unseal to reveal it, and at that point you could you could claim the Bitcoin off of it. And then Casacious had sort of a scratch off scheme. So their notes were pretty sophisticated because they would hide the private key under a scratch off, and then they would do the special UV print over it. So you could only see via UV light if it had been scratched off and then someone tried to replace it. So a fairly sophisticated feature. But those were typically only for sort of gifting to clients, and they never really meant to circulate them. But they were definitely, simpler way than applying a chip to the note. And so our whole sense was to get truly self-custodial, like the greatest guarantees of a bearer instrument. If you have a chip which from its own source of entropy is capable of generating the private key and never showing that private key, then you have a truly bearer crypto instrument. And that private key, you can always use the chip to generate signatures from it to verify and authenticate it. So that's how the first generation Kong notes worked. We're playing around with other models for a different product, which will probably launch later this year, kind of like a Kong V2, but I don't know if we'll make it for Kong specifically. And that one is more of a multi-sig type scenario as opposed to the chip on its own. But yeah, it all comes down to thinking about like what are the trust models implicit in this physical thing, and making it as difficult as possible for us, the manufacturer, to just keep a list of private keys behind the scenes so that we can steal all the crypto off of it, to remove us from the trust, really.
Got it. Was a Kong ATM or Kong credit card on on your roadmap?
We've definitely played around with the concept. We have some video footage that maybe we'll show off one day. We've played around with putting Kong notes, both in ATMs as well as other kinds of dispensers. I think that we still really want to show something like that off, because, yeah, it'd be really great if we could make crypto super accessible at some place like that. One of the big challenges of using Kong technology for other kinds of currencies is not so much the manufacturing, or before the chip shortage, it wasn't the manufacturing, but it's more so the regulatory environment of when you do an exchange like that. It's you go through a whole bunch of different legal concerns, like money exchange, money transmission. Are you capable of doing that? And so, I think our goal there would probably be to work with an existing, ATM type company who already has the regulatory structure to deal with those things, because that's, you can very quickly run afoul of different regulations there.
I see. Because like one use case I could think of is a lot of DAOs are sending their people to various conference or events, and if the DAO has a multi-sig or something, like having that kind of easy access to swipe it. I know Coinbase has USDT integration, so if Coinbase credit card or some integration has multi-sig as well as physical component, it would be interesting.
Right. So that's now we can make different form factors of Kong, and we can do cards like that. And I think that that's a super interesting area to explore, of creating truly on-chain financial configurations where, you can have a DAO and effectively issue cards to the DAO, and each spender has like limits that they can spend and a budget, but it's all traceable. Because the typical thing right now is there are a bunch of people launching crypto credit cards, but they're all through Visa Network or MasterCard. They're not actually wallets per se. They may have a hosted wallet with it behind the scenes, but it's just kind of, I would say, against the ethos of crypto of being self-custodial. So I think it'd be really cool to have a construction where, to your point, there's a multi-sig and cards issued to members, and they're giving spending capability.
I see. And I would like to move on to your second product about chip you had, and what is the difference between chip on Kong Cache versus the chip version 2? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So um, I guess I'll explain a little bit of how we launched Kong. So Kong Cache Notes, we worked on them in 2019, and we launched them at DevCon Osaka, the last DevCon, at the end of 2019. And by launched, it's a kind of an interesting question of how do you get a new currency out into the world. So there was this incredible immersive event called Elsewhere at Osaka, which was really just meant for people to sort of explore the nature of money. And there were all these puzzles set up for people to learn. And if they discovered some of the puzzles, they would find Kong notes throughout this experience. And so there's a few Ethereum OGs who've kind of like they earned Elsewhere passports by completing this puzzle. But the interesting thing was when people saw the cognotes, they're like, oh, wait, this is real. This is a real thing. And so the first day of the conference, I think people were very confused by it. And then the last day of the conference, everybody was trying to get some cognotes before they left. They were just like figuring out what this was. And so that was our initial contact with the world. And, spring of 2020, we were going to a bunch of different crypto events. And then, of course, COVID came and sort of shut things down. And Kong is a very tangible product. You show it off in person, you touch it, you feel it. I think if you go to the website Kong Cache and you see this render we have, you could just imagine that it's just a 3D render. It's some random token project. It has nothing to do with the physical. So that was really tricky. But one of the last conferences we went to prior to things shutting down was ECC in Paris. I think it was ECC 3 at that point. And that's where we met up with the MetaFactory folks. So I synced up with Drew there, and he said, it'd be amazing if we could have the chip portion and we could start to embed that into our merchandise. And so from there, we worked with MetaFactory and we created basically just a small round tag version of the same circuit that we have here on the Kong Cache Note. And I don't have any of the original siloed tags with me, but it's about the size of a quarter. It has the chips on it, and it has the exact same functionality from a hardware perspective. But on-chain, the idea is rather than tying it to fungible token, it ties to, could be an NFT, it could be a wallet, it could be all sorts of things. And so we started manufacturing those for MetaFactory in small quantity. And as we were scaling that up through 2020 and 2021, then the chip shortage hit. So just as that was taking off, it was this challenge of, okay, we can't actually source the chips in reasonable volumes. So if someone wanted to come and do a project of several thousand units, which we had people approaching us, then we just had to turn them away because we couldn't find chips. And so we realized it was a good opportunity, A, to diversify how we think about chips for physical crypto. And, I'd say more of that's coming later this year, and we can talk about that and how we grade chips, but more so how we can improve the user experience. And so that's where we came to the V2 one, which is here. The V1 was called a silo. This is called a halo. And this is the latest generation that we showed off at ETH Denver. So the silo chip stands for silicon lock contract. The halo is a hardware locked contract, so it has slightly different security guarantees. I'd say it's a slightly lower security guarantee, but for the nature of the objects you're attaching it to, we think it's still like pretty robust, much more robust than, say, an off-the-shelf NFC tag that you'd be able to buy.
I see. And so that we are clear, like in Halo, it also directs to a URL link. So what are the core differences like between this versus NFC, which everyone can attach a URL? Like if you can go deep.
Right. Yeah. So I think a lot of folks have probably interacted with some NFC, certainly with payments, but also where you tap a poster or something and a URL comes up, and you can resolve to the URL and see what it comes out to, and that's pretty useful. It's kind of like a radio QR code. A QR code can also resolve to a link. The links with the halos are really convenience functions, but the chip could function entirely without them. So you could, for instance, have a dedicated app or go to another website that shows them off. And so let me pull up here um, the experience to just show it quickly. Okay, so I'm actually going to go directly to the website, which is this generic. The domain is vrfy.ch, but here there's no halo detected, and I can go ahead and initiate a scan with a tag, and here it's on the back of my phone, and boom, this one has detected a halo. So this one is unminted, so to speak. So I can associate content and a contract with it, but it's a very simple sort of top procedure on the back here. And that is all happening much more dynamically than just pulling up a URL. So what's going on behind the scenes is in that URL, statically, you can access information about the public keys of the chip. So it comes with 2 public keys that it's self-generated in the factory. And you can use those public keys for whatever functions, because correspondingly from here, when I go through the Mint Halo process, I can actually inject whatever content I want and get a signature out of the chip. So it's effectively like a hardware wallet. It has the public keys. I can send it information. It'll send me signatures back. And that's the key part, the key difference from a standard NFC tag, is this chip can attest to its own nature. It can attest to the fact that it has these public keys and prove it by generating signatures. No off-the-shelf NFC tag can do that. You do have some NFC tags with symmetric key capabilities, so they can generate encrypted information. But the problem there is they only have individual symmetric keys, or a set of symmetric keys, and you have to have a centralized server at the back end which resolves those keys. So it's kind of custodial. It's much better than just a URL, but you have this whole custodial system. In this case, if we were to disappear tomorrow, anyone can still use these on-chain the same way that a smart contract would continue on-chain without any further intervention.
I see. Because like it takes a time to absorb like the the technology behind this. So because like I was using this, and there are like apps called NFC Reader, and
Right.
I could see the URL. Then I was trying to think like if I want to develop use case for it, let's say open the smart lock, what is the approach? Should I modify the URL associated with it? But now that you said that it goes to the URL, but so every chip has its own public key, but that Mint from your Halo website attaches private key to it, or the private key is already embedded?
The private key is already embedded. So the notion of the minting process is actually using signatures from the chip completely on chain, or in our case, we're actually doing it via Arweave, so a different chain, to generate those signatures to attest to the association of content with this thing. But really nothing is happening on the chip. You're creating sort of a resolution path on chain where you can say, okay, I have this public key. Has there been content created for the key? And you can go then and resolve to that content once it's hosted. But we aren't actually having to modify anything on the chip or the URL. And that's actually a fairly important thing to note, where the challenge around modifying the base URL is you introduce these different trust assumptions then, because we're doing everything via the browser. So you could have a malicious app at another URL which takes the signature and immediately front runs you to do some sort of transaction. So because of that, we're building an infrastructure at Kong where the URL can help to resolve and redirect to apps that are attested to by certain manufacturers or creators. So it isn't just the Kong app; it could be redirected to the MetaFactory experience or CityDAO or whatever it is. But it's pretty important that that code is sort of open and available so that people can audit its functionality, so that they can say, oh, it's not taking a signature and sending it off somewhere. And in the case of, say, a door lock or an access control system, if you're scanning these chips from another device, you can bypass the URL mechanism altogether. You can actually just there's a different layer API on the chip where you can just inject a command with whatever you want signed and receive that command back. And so, I think the simplest version of a door lock could be it has a list of public key chips that allows it to unlock. And if a chip is presented and it can either grab the public key from the URL or ask the chip for the URL, then it can also ask for a signature to attest to it is that chip. And it compares against its list, it validates, and it unlocks.
Got it. And so the reason you have the mint function on your Halo is currently the chip doesn't know my wallet address. When I'm minting it, it's associating the chip public key with my wallet address and getting it on chain.
Well, yeah, the mint is really kind of a simple demo function for what can be done with the chips. So the interesting thing is, because they are like low-cost hardware wallets, the sky's the limit as to how you can implement them. And we had this challenge where, we had different artists and creators that we would ship the chips to, and they'd be like, I have no idea how to implement this. And we could show them a bunch of different code of like, well, here's how we did Kong Cash, and here's how we did, Kongland passports or these other things. But it's still a pretty big challenge to actually go ahead and do that. So with the mint function on the Halos, right now, it's kind of more of a demo of, okay, here's a really simple demo of what you can do with a chip. You can create an off-chain physical NFT. So what happens with this demo mint function is you're including an image, name, description, the same as any other NFT, and you're having the chip sign that information. So that's pretty unique. You're saying the chip is attesting to this information you're associating with it. And then when you do Wallet Connect, you're signing that information as well as the creator. So you're saying, I put this information on this chip. The chip is aware of this information. I'm signing all of it. And you're creating an EIP 712 signature, which in theory, we haven't built a contract to do this, could be upgraded to a full NFT on chain if you wanted. And so you're going through this sort of handshake mainly to create this really strong digital binding to say, I made this physical NFT. Here's the content of this NFT. And now when you scan it, you can review this content, and it's all, it's all trustless. It's not dependent on a server that we're hosting. And so we do that on Arweave using off-chain signatures.
Got it. And so it has like 1 kilobyte of storage, right? So when you're
Yeah, there is some storage on it, but in general, we limit the scope of letting folks store just generic information on the chip. And the reason behind that is, again, it comes down to sort of like phishing vulnerabilities that if there's a standard path to resolve the public key to content, then it limits the capability for anyone to come and write a random set of information on the chip. So in this version of the chip, there's another thing you can do, which is you can generate a third key. And that's for the especially paranoid, where if you say, well, I don't trust how the chip self-generated in the factory, then you can generate a third key on the chip and use that key for other operations. We have an update to these chips coming where there are some strings that the sort of manufacturer can set after the fact, and they're just kind of static information as sort of like pointers. But in general, like the extra kilobytes of space on the chip aren't really intended to be used, because then, this potential to introduce other vulnerabilities goes up significantly. So it no longer is a really simple crypto system, a really simple like sort of physical crypto primitive. It becomes now you need to verify all of this other data and anything else that somebody has loaded onto the chip.
Got it. And like when you say this is like your wallet off chain, like I also think like one could store tokens, one could store NFT in this, but like what is the difference between this off chain wallet and my Ethereum, like my ETH address?
Right. So this, in theory, you can basically go through the Ethereum derivation path on the public key in this and figure out what the wallet address is. And for verification using like the Ethers.js library, it's actually easier for us to do that, to say, okay, let's compute what the Ethereum address for this chip is, and then see what the signatures are saying. But we don't recommend that because this is a wallet where anybody by just tapping their phone to it can generate a signature from it. So it's dangerous in the sense that someone, while you're out and about with whatever, a garment with a chip in it or a card, could, tap their phone or whatever, get a signature, and then go use that on chain themselves. And so we still think that you could use in that configuration. Maybe if it's like a credit card and you have a limited amount of money on it, maybe that's a reasonable risk to take. But we still think that a multi-sig configuration makes the most sense, where the chip, along with another signature, is capable of doing some spending, sort of in the DAO multi-sig scenario that you were talking about.
Got it. And you mentioned about Meta Factory. So if I like from my understanding, they are embedding this chip in the clothes, and not only when you buy it, it gets your physical variable, but they are integrating with multiple metaverses. But while buying, they take your Ethereum wallet address and send it to your address. So it's manual, right? As of now.
Right. It's a manual process as of now, and they aren't actually tying the chips um, to that portion of the assets yet. So some of what we're seeing, and this is all kind of up to the implementation of the manufacturer, is almost a self-onboarding process. So for instance, with Kongland, which is the evolution of Kong Cash, we make these physical passports. They look like credit cards. They're not. They have the chips on them here. This is still the silo configuration, but the idea is with this passport, we actually are letting the citizen NFT holders in Kongland enroll the passport themselves. So we're very soon going to have a reveal event where the NFTs are going to reveal art associated with them. And that's going to be based on a random number signed by each card. So the user in that case is going to be taking a random number signed by the card. They're going to be taking the public key information from the card, and they're actually going to be attaching that via an on-chain transaction to the NFT and saying this NFT is linked to this card. And that's a very strong link between the two because it's going to be built into the ERC 721 contract itself. And so the notion is at any point in the future, they can scan the card and their NFT will come up. Now, there's also the capability for them to remove the card in the case where it gets lost or damaged. In this case, the card isn't really the owner of the NFT. It's merely a signer and a tester of ownership of it. But that's required like a custom ERC 721 contract implementation, which, I think we're going to open up that spec. We're calling it ERC 721 physical. There's some other explorations there where you could create a scheme where if you did in fact lose your wallet on chain, which has the NFT, in some scenario, you could recover the NFT using the physical card and using a signature from it. But it really changes the nature of like how NFTs worked up until now. One other area we're exploring with that is the notion of soul-bound NFTs to physical goods. And the idea behind that is if you read through the NFT spec and you think about the nature of an NFT, really it's a deed to anything. It's this pointer of ownership to anything. And so a physical thing like a small garment or a sweater like really starts to go into, well, whoever possesses it at the time owns it. If you've had a Meta Factory sweater of mine for like 3 years, at what point am I still the owner of it? Like, I mean, the questions start to come up around that. And so with this, you can imagine an NFT where it actually doesn't have any on-chain transfer functions. You're not able to, say, transact with it and send it to another wallet or sell it on OpenSea, but you're only capable of, if you have the garment and you can generate a signature, you can assign yourself as the owner of it. So you can show it in your wallet, you can display ownership of it, but in fact, you can't sell it via the existing marketplaces. And I think it's a really cool idea. I think the challenge is you're giving up liquidity, so you can't like buy it and flip it really easily. But it also means that we could evolve systems where there are in fact like companies or DAOs that carry out escrow of physical goods so that like a bunch of high-end Meta Factory merch is held in a warehouse and they can attest to it and then they ship it out and then the new person claims it. And it really speaks to the nature of these chips with their own cryptographic material. They own themselves. Like they can generate signatures and attest to their own value. You don't need another party to control it or arbitrate it.
Got it. I'm just thinking it might be very interesting use case if for the physical NFT, like I have like geo-based AR experience where I can have a camera, I see various NFT cards and based on there, I read the wallet address and curate AR experience accordingly.
Yeah. So this is funny because this is actually what we worked on just prior to Kong. So when we started first experimenting with crypto, we built um, a crypto version of AirTags before AirTags was around. So Bluetooth trackers that were crypto focused. And we got very far with that product. We had it ready to go, but the challenge was we could see that at that point, we were just so far ahead of um, efficient transactions on chain. Like it would just be way too costly for us to implement it. And so that product we actually shelved, but the whole idea was you could see it in three-dimensional space, and then you could place them out in the world and start to sort of claim token or associate with them. But I do think you could do a simplified version where on the Halo chip, you could put a QR code or an AR anchor that you use to generate this experience, and then you tap it to authenticate it. And I think that's a really cool area of exploration to think about. And the nice thing is that chips are low cost enough that you can embed them and put them in a lot of different places.
Got it. Are there any other applications of Kong Cash or Kong chip which we didn't cover in this interview, which you would like to share?
Yeah, I think that sort of I alluded to it here, and we talked about this idea with the Kongland citizen passport. So I think the interesting thing about the passports and this sort of card form factor is you can start to imagine scenarios where, DAOs are giving out memberships. So for instance, Cabin DAO has done this with cabin passports, where they're now handing out physical passports to past members. And I think that notion is really cool because you start to create this physical artifact which ties a person to the DAO. So a lot of people would say, well, we heard this with Kong Cash. They're like, why make a cash instrument when we're trying to do everything digital? Like, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Why have this physical artifact when it's just a pain to have a wallet? And the reason behind it is we still live in the real world. We're still humans trained on millions of years of evolution of like dealing with physical things. And so physical artifacts are really important. When people typically visualize the idea of money and the idea of cash, they're visualizing their local currency or a currency that's valuable to them. They're visualizing the images of faces and numbers. They aren't visualizing private keys. So cash still has this really critical, important role in the sense that it helps to shape one's ideas around money. And in fact, the crazy thing about that is there's a bunch of studies that show that people who spend cash versus credit cards or debit cards have very different spending patterns. They're very careful about how they spend their cash versus credit card and debit card users just kind of spend whatever. And so the data shows that the psychology cache is really, really crucial. And so likewise, we think the psychology of having a physical artifact tying you to whatever it is, a DAO, or in the case of Kongland, a crypto state, like that's actually really important to have that passport to indicate, even if you don't carry it with you at all times, you have the stronger association. And so we think that's a really interesting thing for DAOs to explore. And we want to work with more DAOs to get physical passports with, the simplest functionality of it is you go to an event and you can scan in and attest to being an NFT holder. But you could start to build much richer experiences because the cool thing is not only can you use it as a wallet, but you can use it as a DID. And you can use it through all these off-chain mechanisms like Ceramic, where you could start to create a record of your in-person experiences because of this. Again, obviously a person could pull out their phone and tap apps and so forth, but you can have a much more natural, like, okay, I'm able to just tap this. I'm able to show it to people. I'm able to flex that I've like been to whatever, XYZ number of city DAO or friends with benefit events.
Got it. And I also foresee like uh, a huge amount of Web2 community. Like this could be a good onboarding experience where it maybe increases a factor of trust or like accessibility for them. And
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and I think to your reference earlier around access control, like coming back to that, having spent so much time working on access control, I'm somewhat allergic to doing more of it. But um, I think there's a lot of interesting exploration happening right now with new protocols and products arising of creating access control to any sorts of things for users. And a lot of them are just digital experiences, like let's give our DAO access control to a closed private DAO notion or whatever. But I really like this idea of physical real world access control. And that's where, yeah, the card, or if you had a Metafactory jacket with the tag embedded on your wrist, you can swipe your wrist and wear that jacket as another attester of that. So the physical real world experiences, I think, is a space that's really interesting to explore. And there's a few other projects that have started to do this through issuance of POAPs via scanning. And yeah, we're looking forward to working with them and kind of coming up with different innovative ways to do it.
I think that's exciting. I just thought, what if like this physical NFT, if we can connect with like IoT or LCD display, and each card you have the option of what are the token balance and stuff like that. Like if we connect it to Wi-Fi, and it would be interesting where people can see real-time balances of the token on this card.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think there's like a whole nother set of experiences of like, okay, if you try to build the card a little bit more towards an actual hardware wallet and build in like screens or controls, we've done some experiments there. Our big thing, the thing we realize with NFC, which is radically different than a typical one, is not having a battery changes everything. You can
Mhm.
just always use the card. Obviously, it's dependent on the smartphone or another scanner, but that's a really powerful thing. You can wash it. It's much more resilient. There are potential ways that one could explore, maybe not necessarily a battery type system, but powering a very low powered type of screen. And there's some minor exploration we've done there, which is kind of interesting. And that gives you the capability as a user to verify first what the card is signing, like a typical hardware wallet. But I think that there's so much to explore in sort of the low cost NFC immediately usable, that having done hardware for a long time, it's really fun to build hardware, but it's also very costly and very
Mhm.
risky, because you may build a product that you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on, and then it turns out like the customer base is just fine using this other thing. So
I see. Uh, what's your roadmap? Like, if you had unlimited time and resources, what are some other ideas or things you wish you can do?
yeah, so I mean the big roadmap. So obviously talk about Kong Cash. So Kong Land was something that we announced last year, which is really a DAO crypto state focused on bringing in all sorts of creators to use the chip technology to go off and build different things and to build public goods around that. So Kongland is intentional around, it wants to build infrastructure that helps people to resolve these chips and understand the nature of these chips. And it's not a company, and that the idea is creating protocols that would exist into the future, even if Kongland or we stop working on it. So that's the main thrust of Kongland, and that's taken us from Kong Cash to silos to now Halos. But really, the long-term focus is, if as a space, physical NFT creators can start to focus in on, okay, self-custody is important, chips are important, then at a certain point, there's enough volume to justify making a custom chip. And that is really our long-term or even medium-term goal is, let's build a custom chip for the space that benefits everyone, that's a reasonable cost, and is open and auditable. And that's the biggest problem today is, despite the best secure chips on the market, and they have all these claims of security, really no one knows exactly how those chips are laid out. And likewise, in the creation process, no one knows how those chips are made. And there's a few projects in the chip space which are trying to do this independently. And we want to bring that into, let's tailor a specific solution for crypto. And that this is actually going back to what we worked on in 2018, 2019, is we wanted to make a chip back then, but we realized it was too early. And so now, while I still think we're early, I think the narrative is much stronger to say, okay, if all of a sudden people are using 1 million of these chips each year, that starts to justify the investment of let's go build a custom chip which people can audit. So I'd say that's one big part of the mission. And then the other big part of the mission, which is near term, is building out protocol level pieces so that any creator can show up, interact with these chips, and then create an experience around them, which is something that they totally own, which is protocol run, which doesn't rely on some backend server to mediate.
Got it. And what is a piece of advice for developers and creators who wants to experiment in this physical digital space?
Yeah, I would say that the thing that we've learned from Kongland citizens coming in and creating things is that the sky's the limit to the experience, and the sky's the limit to integrating into whatever art or physical thing that you can think of. And so this is what is the most cool part of Kongland, is people who have never thought about chips before have come together, and they're integrating them into things like records, like for music NFTs, or like blown glass, like beautiful art pieces, or Loot LARP, which is putting it into these beautiful fake LARP weapons, and like all sorts of stuff that I never would have dreamed of myself. And so I'd say, as a physical creator, yeah, like we want to get you chips so you can play around with ideas, and we want to try to make the tooling as straightforward as possible. But there's definitely gaps. So I'd say for developers, there's going to be a lot of ways in which you can use these signatures, not only to do sort of NFT type stuff, but we think the really interesting exploration is going to be around DeFi type stuff, that you can start to build financial instruments into physical things, which is just a crazy idea, but completely feasible. And the long-term goal of that is, let's just get more self-custodial crypto into the world. We need to onboard billions more people. Let's try to do it through self-custodial crypto as opposed to centralized exchanges.
Got it. And any learning resources or conference you recommend for people to understand this technology very well?
Yeah, I mean, so that's where we need to do a much better job of putting together resources ourselves. We have like a collection of repos, and I think we need to create some simple tutorials from those. We don't have any conferences ourselves, but we try to make a point of attending the major Ethereum conferences. So we're definitely going to be at ETHCC. I think there's probably a couple others before then that we'll show up at. But yeah, the goal is that Kongland creates way more materials there, and hopefully hosts some more experimentation for creators.
Awesome. I have this last section of the interview. We'll do rapid fire, and you'll
Cool.
have 20 or 10 seconds to answer, and gotta keep it brief.
Okay.
So let's do it. Which city is in your travel bucket list?
Which city is in my travel bucket list? Oh gosh. I would probably have to say, let's go with Auckland in New Zealand. So,
Any technical or business book which made a big impact in your life?
a technical or business book that made a big impact in my life. I would say, I believe it's Infinite Games is a great book. I recommend anyone reading it.
Your favorite movie?
2001: A Space Odyssey.
Role model?
A role model. I always like to reference this really old movie actor called Bob Hope, because he just seemed to enjoy life so much.
Nice. Yeah, any NFT project which is your favorite or top three NFT projects of your?
So I'm always a big fan of this loot derivative called Dope Wars. So the way that Dope Wars loot came together was really cool. It was just like a Discord full of people are like, this loot idea is cool. Let's mirror it off of this old calculator game. And so yeah, same idea that you own a list of words. I think that with Dolly 2, lists of words are make a ton of sense for games because now AI will just generate the experience for us.
Nice. And you're like, are you like a mountain person or a beach person?
I'm a mountain person, as evidenced by leaving California and coming to Colorado.
I see. Is there anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to share?
No, I'm glad to speak with you and go so deep on the history of Kong and going from smart locks to physical wallets. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. It was quite insightful. I learned a lot, and I really look forward to how the community grows and what's coming next.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mayer.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.